The nurse didn't look at me when she spoke. She spoke to him. "I'll need the insurance documents," she said, sliding the clipboard across the counter toward Jason. "And the next of kin authorization." I was sitting right there, upright, breathing. My hand still smelled faintly of antiseptic and melted snow. Jason accepted the clipboard without hesitation. His fingers were steady, practiced. I waited for him to correct her, to say, "She's awake. She's fine. Ask Ariana." He didn't. Instead, he signed where she pointed and thanked her like this was routine. People in the waiting area glanced at me with that quiet pity reserved for the almost dead. That was when I realized something had already been decided, without me. And then I saw the line he just signed. It wasn't medical. It was legal. And I had no idea what I had just agreed to. My name is Ariana. I used to believe blood meant protection. I used to think siblings were built-in safety nets. That day rewrote everything. If you're listening to this, don't rush ahead. What happened to me didn't unfold in explosions. It arrived quietly, through paperwork, polite smiles, and people assuming my brother spoke for me. I didn't argue. I didn't interrupt. I watched. Because sometimes survival starts with staying silent long enough to understand the game. And that's when I began remembering things I'd spent years excusing, including the first moment Jason taught me what I was worth to him. Before the crash, my life looked simple from the outside. I worked remotely as a compliance analyst. Quiet job, stable income. I owned my own house, paid my bills on time, kept my circle small. I wasn't flashy, and I didn't need validation. I liked routine. Morning coffee by the window. Evening walks when the streets went quiet. Order gave me comfort. Jason, on the other hand, lived louder. He drifted between business ideas, always one opportunity away from making it big. Crypto schemes, dropshipping stores, short-lived partnerships that ended in blame. Every few months, he'd call with a new plan in the same tone. Confident, urgent, already counting money that didn't exist yet. And somehow, I was always part of the plan. Not officially, never on paper. But I was the backup, the one who covered small gaps, lent small amounts, reviewed contracts, explained fine print, the responsible sibling, the steady one, the invisible safety net he pretended not to rely on. I didn't resent it. Not at first. After our parents died, we only had each other. That fact carried weight. It shaped choices. It taught me to compromise faster than I should have. Jason learned early that I didn't like conflict. He learned that I preferred peace over confrontation. He learned that if he waited long enough, I would usually step in. So he let me. He'd show up unannounced, eat my food, complain about landlords, hint about overdue payments. I'd listen, offer practical advice. Sometimes I'd transfer money with a note that said, "Pay me back when you can." He rarely did. Still, I told myself this was what family looked like in adulthood, uneven, messy but loyal underneath. I told myself that when he forgot my birthday. I told myself that when he borrowed my car and returned it on empty. I told myself that when he once joked, half laughing, that I was too soft to survive the real world. I didn't hear the warning in that sentence. I heard affection. Even a week before the crash, he called asking about my insurance coverage. Framed it as curiosity. Said he was comparing policies. I answered without thinking. Why wouldn't I? At the time, it felt harmless. But lying in that hospital bed, watching him sign documents like I wasn't even present, I finally understood something I'd been too gentle to admit. Jason had never seen me as an equal. He saw me as infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't get consulted before it's used. The memory landed heavy in my chest. Because suddenly, the crash didn't feel random anymore. And neither did his timing. They told me I'd been found half buried in snow, still strapped into my seatbelt. My car angled sideways against a frozen embankment. Single vehicle accident. Loss of control. Weather-related. That's what the police report said. Jason filled in the blanks with practiced concern. He stood beside my bed, arms folded, explaining everything to anyone who would listen. How I'd called him earlier that evening, how I'd sounded tired, how the roads were dangerous this time of year. He even squeezed my hand once for effect. I let him talk. Inside, fragments were starting to surface. Not clearly. Not yet. Just flashes. The way he'd insisted I take that back road instead of the highway. The way he'd offered to check something under my hood before I left his place. The way his goodbye had felt rushed, distracted, like he already had somewhere else to be. I asked the nurse if anyone had accessed my phone. She said Jason had brought it in. I asked if he'd unlocked it. She said yes. He said I'd given him the passcode years ago. Which was true. I just hadn't remembered telling him recently. Later that afternoon, a hospital administrator came in with a tablet and a soft voice. She said there were some forms Jason had already started, given the severity of my injuries. She used words like contingency and temporary authority. I asked what kind of authority. She hesitated, then said, "In case you became unresponsive." I was responsive. I was sitting up. Yet there it was on the screen, Jason listed as medical proxy. Jason listed as financial contact. Jason listed as decision maker. All timestamped within hours of the crash. He'd moved quickly. Too quickly. That night, when he thought I was asleep, I watched him through half-lowered lashes as he stood by the window, whispering into his phone. "I just need the doctor to confirm neurological impairment," he said quietly. "Yeah, then we can proceed." Proceed with what? My heart started beating in a way that had nothing to do with injuries. I didn't confront him. I didn't alert anyone. I waited, because something told me this wasn't panic on his part. It was planning. And if Jason was already moving pieces behind my back, then whatever he thought was coming next had been in motion long before my car ever touched the snow. By the second day, everyone had decided I was fragile. Doctors spoke slowly around me. Social workers addressed Jason first. Even the physical therapist asked him whether I was ready to try standing. I corrected them, gently at first. "I can answer." They smiled, nodded, then turned back to my brother. Jason leaned into it naturally. He brought coffee for the staff, remembered names, repeated phrases the neurologist used, as if he were part of the care team. He framed every update with concern layered over control. "She's confused sometimes," he told them. I wasn't. She doesn't always remember conversations. I did. She gets overwhelmed easily, only when people spoke about me like I wasn't there. Once, when I asked to review my own test results, he placed a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Let's not stress you out, Ari. Just focus on healing." He said it like advice. It felt like instruction. That afternoon, I overheard him in the hallway again. Same quiet voice, different urgency. 4 days should be enough, he said. The neurologist already mentioned delayed cognitive response. If we push now, we can establish incapacity. Establish, not evaluate. Establish. I closed my eyes and let my breathing slow. This wasn't fear talking. This was process. Back in the room, he pulled up a chair and sat too close. Asked if I remembered our childhood vacations. Our parents' favorite restaurant. Little memory tests disguised as nostalgia. I answered everything correctly. He smiled anyway. Later, a woman from legal services came by. She introduced herself, glanced at Jason, then explained that certain protective steps had been initiated due to potential impairment following traumatic brain injury. I asked what steps. She said Jason had requested preliminary conservatorship paperwork, just in case. Just in case I couldn't advocate for myself. Just in case I disappeared legally while still breathing. I told her I was fully oriented. She said, "That's wonderful," and made a note. But she didn't stop the process. Jason walked her out, hand on her elbow like they were colleagues. When he came back, he told me everything was under control. That word again. Control. I started noticing details I'd missed before. How he positioned himself between me and anyone with authority. How he answered questions meant for me. How he kept my phone safe in his jacket pocket. How he gently suggested I rest whenever I tried to push back. By evening, my chart reflected concerns I had never expressed. Mood instability. Possible confusion. Limited insight. Someone had been speaking for me, and everyone was listening. I stared at the ceiling long after visiting hours ended, replaying his whispers, his signatures, his timelines. Because now I understood something crucial. Jason wasn't reacting to a crisis. He was executing a plan. And whatever he had set in motion didn't depend on whether I recovered. It depended on how long he could keep me quiet. They moved me to a quieter wing the next morning. Jason said it was for my comfort. The room had fewer windows, thicker doors, a different nursing rotation. I didn't question it aloud, but I felt the shift immediately. Less foot traffic, fewer spontaneous check-ins, longer stretches where no one came unless he asked. He told the staff I tired easily, so they stopped encouraging conversation. He told them loud noises upset me, so they closed my door more often. He told them I preferred rest, so they let him manage my visitors. By the end of the day, I was effectively sealed off. When I asked for my phone, he said it was being sanitized. When I asked for my laptop, he said the doctor recommended screen breaks. When I asked to call my attorney, someone I'd worked with years ago on a property matter, he tilted his head slightly and said, "Ariana, you don't need to involve outsiders right now." Outsiders. I tried to explain that I felt fine, that I was thinking clearly, that something didn't feel right. He nodded sympathetically, then told the nurse I was experiencing anxiety episodes. The nurse adjusted my medication. Not enough to sedate me, just enough to soften my edges. I started writing things down on paper towels. Times, names, phrases I overheard. Tiny inconsistencies that might mean nothing individually, but formed a pattern together. I hid the notes inside the lining of my pillowcase. At night, doubt crept in. Was I overreacting? Had the crash scrambled my instincts? Jason had always been chaotic, not malicious. Reckless, not strategic. Maybe he really was just trying to help. Maybe the legal paperwork was standard procedure. Maybe I was projecting intent where there was only incompetence. But then he slipped. He mentioned a beneficiary update I hadn't made. He referenced a life insurance rider I'd added quietly years ago. He casually brought up the equity in my house, using exact numbers. Details I hadn't shared recently. Details he shouldn't have known unless he'd accessed my accounts. I asked how he knew. He said, "You told me." I hadn't. That night, I pretended to sleep while he sat by the bed scrolling through his phone. At one point, he leaned forward and whispered, almost tenderly, "You're going to be okay, Ari. Just let me handle things." I watched his reflection in the darkened monitor screen. There was no panic in his face, only patience. That's when the last of my uncertainty drained away. This wasn't a brother stepping up. This was someone waiting for permission to take everything. And I still didn't know how far he was willing to go to make that happen. On the third day, the neurologist used the word inconclusive. He explained that post-traumatic symptoms can fluctuate, that cognitive clarity might come and go, that emotional regulation could be temporarily affected, that they'd need more observation before making definitive statements. Jason nodded along, asking careful questions. I focused on the one sentence that mattered. Right now, she's responsive and oriented. Jason thanked him anyway. After the doctor left, Jason sat on the edge of my bed and exhaled slowly, like someone who had just received disappointing news. "This is taking longer than I expected," he said quietly. Expected? I asked what he meant. He smiled and said, "Recovery. I just want you comfortable." But later that afternoon, everything shifted. A hospital administrator returned with updated paperwork. This time, Jason didn't leave the room. She explained that due to lingering neurological concerns, temporary safeguards were being put in place regarding my finances and property until I was medically cleared. Temporary safeguards. She handed Jason a stylus. I asked why I hadn't been consulted. She said Jason had initiated the process earlier, and that this was simply formalizing protections already discussed. Jason signed again. I was told I could contest it later. Later. That evening, I tried to access my bank app from a hospital tablet. The login failed. I asked Jason if there was an issue. He said there must be. Then he changed the subject. The next morning, my house insurer called Jason, not me. A courier delivered certified envelopes addressed to him. A paralegal left a voicemail on his phone while he stood 10 feet away from my bed. I wasn't being erased dramatically. I was being replaced administratively. Every system that mattered had quietly accepted him as the primary authority. By lunchtime, I no longer had direct access to my own accounts. By evening, I was officially listed as temporarily incapacitated pending review. No one asked me how I felt about that. Jason brought flowers that night. White lilies. He set them on the windowsill and told me everything was under control. I stared at the petals while he spoke, because now it was happening in real time. The legal shift, the financial lockout, the narrative forming around my supposed instability. And for the first time since the crash, I felt something close to loss, not emotional, but structural. I was watching my life change hands without a fight, or so everyone thought. Jason kissed my forehead before leaving, and said he'd be back in the morning. After he walked out, I reached into my pillowcase and unfolded my notes. I had names. I had timestamps. And I had one detail Jason didn't realize yet. When he unlocked my phone days earlier, he'd also synced it to a cloud backup tied to my work email, which meant every message he sent, every document he opened, every call he made from my device, had copied itself somewhere he hadn't thought to check. I closed my eyes slowly, because now I knew two things. He thought he'd already won, and he had no idea he was building the case against himself. I stopped pushing after that, not because I gave up, because resistance would have changed his behavior, and I needed him predictable. So I became exactly what Jason wanted to see. I answered questions slowly, let pauses stretch, let nurses repeat themselves. I asked the same harmless clarifications twice. I thanked people excessively. I let Jason explain things for me. I became small on purpose. He relaxed almost immediately. He started taking phone calls in the room again, started leaving his laptop open on the side table, started speaking freely about timelines and logistics, assuming the medication had dulled my awareness. I let him think that. He discussed estate matters with a lawyer while I stared out the window. He complained to a friend about how exhausting it was to manage everything alone. He told someone I was not really in a state to understand paperwork. Every word went into my memory. Every conversation synced to my backup. At night, I practiced walking short distances with a therapist, pretending to tire faster than I actually did. During the day, I asked Jason whether he'd eaten, whether he was sleeping okay, whether this was hard on him. He started confiding. He admitted he'd already contacted a realtor about my house. He said he was just exploring options. He mentioned selling quickly before the market shifted. He framed it as responsibility. I framed it as evidence. On the fourth morning, he arrived with a stack of new documents and a careful tone. "These are just precautionary," he said. "Standard stuff." One of the forms referenced mental health risk. Another included language about self-harm. I asked what that was. He said it was for insurance. I told him I didn't feel suicidal. He squeezed my hand and said, "I know, Ari, but this protects us if anyone questions the accident." Us. I signed nothing, but I let him leave the papers on the table. That afternoon, he stepped into the hallway to take a call. I used that window to photograph every page. By evening, he was talking openly about timing. He said 4 days was usually enough to establish incapacity. He said once things were finalized, he'd be able to clean up loose ends. I asked what loose ends meant. He smiled and said, "Just practical stuff." I watched him pack his bag that night and felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not anger. Clarity, because now I understood the shape of what he was building. And I also knew he had started underestimating me. He told me he'd be away the next day handling arrangements. He kissed my cheek and said everything would be taken care of. After he left, I opened my work email on the hospital computer and checked the cloud folder. It was full. Messages, call logs, document previews, time-stamped access records. He hadn't just been careless. He'd been thorough, and that meant the trail was long. I leaned back against the pillows and let my eyes close, because the next phase wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about letting Jason finish exposing himself. And I could already see exactly how he was going to do it. Jason didn't come back the next morning. Instead, a courier arrived with certified envelopes. I watched the nurse sign for them, then carry them straight to the administrative office, Jason's name already highlighted on every label. I asked what they were. She said legal correspondence. I thanked her and said nothing else, because by now, I could map his movements without seeing him. He'd moved from hospital control to asset control. The cloud folder updated automatically. I saw realtor emails scheduling walkthroughs of my house. I saw bank notifications requesting verification of authority. I saw draft contracts labeled urgent. He was consolidating. Not panicking. Consolidating. I spent the morning reviewing everything quietly. Screenshots of his conversations, recordings of hallway calls, PDF previews of forms I hadn't signed. There was a rhythm to it. He always initiated first contact. He always framed urgency. He always used language that implied I was unstable without saying it directly. And most importantly, he always spoke as if my absence was temporary, like he was borrowing my life, not taking it. That told me something crucial. Jason wasn't trying to disappear me. He was trying to replace me administratively, which meant he needed everything to look clean. That's when I stopped thinking emotionally. I started thinking procedurally. I contacted my employer through a secure internal channel and flagged potential identity misuse. They escalated it within minutes. Corporate compliance doesn't move fast unless it smells fraud. I reached out to my attorney through encrypted email. I sent him the cloud folder. I sent timestamps. I sent audio. I sent scanned documents with Jason's signatures. He replied with one sentence. Do not alert your brother. We're documenting. By afternoon, a patient advocate appeared at my bedside and asked me, directly, whether I felt safe. I said yes. Then I added that I felt misrepresented. Her posture changed. I requested a second neurological evaluation. I requested independent legal counsel be noted in my chart. I requested that all future decisions require my written consent. She didn't argue. She took notes. And suddenly, for the first time since the crash, someone was writing down my words instead of Jason's. That evening, Jason finally called. He sounded upbeat, told me he'd been productive, said the house might sell faster than expected. I asked him how the realtor visit went. He froze for half a second before answering. He didn't realize I already knew. I told him I was proud of him for handling everything. He thanked me, sincerely. After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling and let the reality settle in. He thought I was grateful. He thought I was passive. He thought the system had already chosen him, which meant he was about to get bolder. And when people like Jason get comfortable, they stop protecting themselves. That was the opening, and I intended to let him walk straight through it. Jason returned 2 days later. He brought coffee for the nurses again, joked with the receptionist, walked into my room like a man carrying good news. The market's hot, he said, setting his bag down. We'll be able to move fast. I nodded slowly, asked if the paperwork was finalized. He said almost. That single word told me everything. Almost meant he still needed something from me. Almost meant there were signatures missing. Almost meant he was about to apply pressure. He pulled out a folder and placed it carefully on the side table. These are just clarifications, he said. Standard declarations. I didn't open it. I asked how much the realtor thought the house would sell for. He told me it was lower than market value. I noted that. Then he mentioned insurance timelines, said certain benefits required documentation of mental state at the time of the accident. I asked what kind of documentation. He hesitated, then said something about pre-existing stress, burnout, isolation. He was building a narrative. He slid one page toward me and pointed at a line near the bottom. Just here, he said gently. I told him I needed to read it first. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. That night, after he left, I accessed the cloud folder again. There was a new audio file. He'd made a call from my phone while I was asleep. He thought the backup was inactive. He was wrong. In the recording, I heard his voice clearly. She was already fragile, he said to someone. If we frame it right, the crash looks intentional. That unlocks the policy faster. Frame it. Intentional. Unlocks. I didn't react outwardly. I forwarded the file to my attorney. Then I forwarded it to the compliance team at my bank. Then I forwarded it to a private investigator my lawyer had already engaged. Jason thought he was guiding a process. He didn't realize he'd just verbalized motive. The next morning, a fire inspector came to my room asking routine questions about my home's electrical history. Jason stood beside me, answering for me again. I corrected him once. He shot me a look. Later, he complained quietly that too many people were suddenly involved. I apologized. He told me not to worry, but he started watching me more closely after that, checking my expressions, monitoring how quickly I responded, adjusting his tone. He sensed the shift. He just didn't understand it yet. By evening, he told me he'd need access to the house again to handle some maintenance. I asked what kind. He said minor repairs. I knew better, because earlier that day, the investigator had emailed me something Jason didn't realize he triggered. Jason had requested accelerated property clearance. That usually comes before one of two things: sale or destruction. And given the new insurance filings he'd submitted, I could already see which option he was leaning toward. I stopped thinking of Jason as my brother after that. Not in anger. In precision. Family language blurs boundaries. It invites hesitation. It softens consequences. So I replaced the word brother with subject in my head. Subject had a pattern. Subject escalated when timeline slipped. Subject grew reckless when he felt observed. Subject believed authority could be manufactured through repetition. Once I framed him that way, everything simplified. I reviewed the investigator's notes between physical therapy sessions, learned which neighbors had seen him at my house late at night, learned he'd requested copies of utility layouts, learned he'd asked a contractor about electrical access points under the pretense of emergency upgrades. He was preparing something irreversible. At the hospital, I began cooperating just enough to accelerate my discharge timeline. I performed well on cognitive tests. I asked focused questions. I stopped pretending confusion. The neurologist revised my chart. Patient displays full orientation and intact executive function. That sentence mattered. It put a crack in Jason's authority. He noticed. He asked why the doctor had changed his tone. I said I felt clearer. He said we'd talk later. That afternoon, legal services updated my status. Temporary conservatorship, pending review. Jason still had influence, but it was no longer absolute. I used the window. I signed limited power of attorney documents, my own, drafted by my lawyer, that restricted Jason's access retroactively. I authorized financial monitoring on all accounts. I approved surveillance placement at my house through the investigators' team. I coordinated quietly with local law enforcement, framing everything as potential financial exploitation following traumatic injury. No accusations, just documentation. They opened a file. Jason came in that evening carrying takeout and force cheer. He told me the insurance adjuster wanted one last statement about my mental state before the crash. I asked if it had to be recorded. He said yes. I agreed. He set his phone on the table and hit record. He thought he was controlling the narrative. I answered calmly. I said I'd been stressed from work, but not depressed. I said I had plans for the future. I said I loved my home. I said I had no intention of harming myself. He interjected twice, steering the conversation. Both times I corrected him. All of it went into evidence. Afterward, he looked irritated. He told me he needed to check something at the house that night. I told him to be careful driving. He laughed. And then he said something that sealed his trajectory. Once this is over, we can both finally move on. Both. I watched him leave and felt nothing. Because by then, every step he took was already being tracked. Every call he made was being logged. And the next move he thought was private was about to become very public. They discharged me the next morning. Jason offered to take me home. I declined. I said I wanted a quiet recovery space and booked a short-term furnished apartment through my attorney's assistant. Jason didn't argue, but I saw calculation flicker across his face. He asked for the address. I told him later. I didn't mean today. From the apartment, I coordinated everything. The investigator confirmed Jason had been at my house after midnight. Neighbors reported his car idling in the driveway. He'd entered through the side door using a spare key I'd forgotten he still had. The security cameras we'd installed quietly captured him moving room to room, opening drawers, checking cabinets, pulling folders from my office. He wasn't stealing objects. He was verifying documents. Then he went into the garage. He stayed there a long time. The fire department flagged the footage as suspicious immediately. Accelerant traces appeared near the breaker panel. Jason called me an hour later, told me there'd been a small electrical issue at the house, said he'd handled it. I thanked him and forwarded the footage to law enforcement. They advised me not to confront him. They said to let the situation develop. They were already coordinating with arson investigators. I gave a recorded statement detailing everything from the hospital onward. They asked if I believed Jason intended to harm me. I said I believed he intended to benefit from my absence. There's a difference. That afternoon, my attorney finalized a protective order restricting Jason from making any financial or medical decisions on my behalf. It went into effect immediately. Jason hadn't been notified yet. He was still operating under the assumption that he was in control. He texted asking when I'd be ready to sign the remaining documents. I told him soon. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That evening, he emailed me a new set of forms, this time including a declaration stating I'd expressed suicidal ideation prior to the crash. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to the detective. The investigator sent me one last update before sunset. Jason had returned to the house. This time, he brought a gas can. Law enforcement advised patience. They wanted him caught in action. I sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet apartment and stared at my phone, waiting for the call that would confirm he'd crossed the final line. Because once he did, there would be no more gray areas. No more paperwork battles. No more narrative disputes. Just consequences. And Jason was walking straight toward them. Jason called me just after dark. His voice was tight, controlled too carefully. "There's smoke," he said. "Something tripped in the garage. I'm trying to air the place out." I asked if he was okay. He said yes. He asked where I was staying again. I told him I'd send the address later. I didn't, because at that exact moment, my phone vibrated with an incoming update from the investigator. Jason had been inside my house for 12 minutes. The gas can was visible on camera. He poured a line along the wall behind the breaker panel. And then he'd stopped. Not because he changed his mind, because he thought he heard something outside. I stayed on the call with Jason, keeping my tone neutral. Told him he should probably step away and let professionals handle it. He agreed too quickly. Said he didn't want to risk liability. Liability. That word mattered. I thanked him for being responsible. He hung up. 2 minutes later, law enforcement vehicles rolled silently into my neighborhood. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just headlights cutting through winter fog. They waited. Jason came back out of the house carrying the gas can. He didn't see them at first. He walked toward his car like someone finishing a chore. That's when they moved. The arrest happened fast. Hands on the hood. Cuffs. A neighbor stepped onto their porch, phone already raised. Someone else opened a window. Within minutes, 3 squad cars blocked the street. The investigator sent me a still image from the body cam feed. Jason's face mid-sentence. Mouth open. Eyes confused. He hadn't prepared for witnesses. He hadn't prepared for timing. He hadn't prepared for me not being helpless. But the real reversal didn't happen on the street. It happened an hour later. Because while Jason was sitting in the back of a patrol car, his phone started lighting up. Not from me. From his attorney. From the insurance adjuster. From the bank's fraud department. From legal services. Every system he thought he controlled was suddenly asking questions. And he still didn't know why. I stood by the apartment window watching headlights disappear down the road, holding the device that contained every recording, every document, every signature trail. Jason thought this was about arson now. He had no idea the financial charges were already queued, or that the hospital had reopened my case file, or that his recorded framing conversation had been transcribed and flagged for prosecutorial review. He believed this was a misunderstanding, a delay, a bump in the plan. He didn't realize he'd just stepped back into the arena. And this time, I wasn't lying in a hospital bed. I was standing. And tomorrow morning, he was going to learn exactly what I'd been doing while he thought I was broken. Jason made bail by morning. Not because the charges were light, because he still believed money could smooth anything. He texted me before sunrise. They misunderstood the situation. I'll explain everything. Don't worry. I didn't reply. Instead, I watched the investigators' live feed from a temporary camera positioned across from my house. Jason returned less than 2 hours later, walking past the caution tape like it was decorative. He thought the worst was over. He thought the arrest had been procedural. He thought I'd be scared. He went inside and started making calls. His voice carried through the open garage. He blamed contractors. He blamed faulty wiring. He told someone the police were overreacting because I was mentally fragile. Then he escalated. He contacted the insurance company directly and pushed for accelerated processing, citing emotional distress and financial hardship due to my condition. He emailed the realtor demanding the listing go live immediately. He called his attorney and said, "She's not in a position to object. We need to move before she regains clarity." Before. That word came up again. He didn't realize my attorney was already on that call. He didn't realize the bank had frozen every account he'd touched. He didn't realize the hospital had officially amended my chart, removing every reference to cognitive impairment and adding a notation about third-party interference. He was operating on yesterday's power. That's when he made his biggest mistake. He emailed me a document titled Final Declaration. Inside it was a statement asserting that I had expressed suicidal thoughts before the crash and had authorized Jason to act on my behalf if I became incapacitated. He'd written it himself, He asked me to sign digitally. He added, "This clears everything up. After this, we can put it behind us." I forwarded it to the detective. Then I did something Jason never expected. I replied. I told him I wanted to meet. Public place. Midday. He agreed immediately. Confidence rushed back into his tone. He thought I was finally compliant. He chose the location. A downtown cafe near the courthouse. Busy lunch hour. Lots of witnesses. He believed visibility protected him. He didn't know it trapped him. Because by then, every agency involved was already aligned. They were just waiting for one more thing. They were waiting for him to say it out loud. And Jason, convinced he was still in control, was about to walk straight into a room full of people who already had his entire story. He just didn't know which part I decided to expose first. Jason arrived early. He always did when he thought he was winning. He chose a corner table by the window, ordered coffee, and positioned himself so he could see the entrance. When I walked in, he stood up with that familiar practice concern, arms already opening like this was a reconciliation. I didn't hug him. I sat. He blinked once, then recovered. "You look better," he said. "Clearer." I thanked him. He leaned forward immediately, lowering his voice. "Once you sign the declaration, everything resets. Insurance releases. The house sells. We both move on. Both again." I asked him to explain the document in his own words. He hesitated, then smiled like he was indulging me. "It just says you were overwhelmed before the accident. That you trusted me to step in. That's all." I nodded slowly. "And the part about suicidal ideation?" He waved it off. "That's just language. Legal phrasing. It helps the claim. Helps." I pulled my phone out and placed it on the table between us. "Recording." He noticed. His jaw tightened. "You don't need that," he said. "I do," I replied. People were everywhere. Business lunches, courthouse staff, a couple with a stroller waiting in line. No one was listening yet. Jason lowered his voice further. "Ariana, don't complicate this. You were stressed. You crashed. We're just cleaning it up." I asked him why he accessed my cloud backups. He stiffened. I asked him why he told someone the crash could be framed as intentional. His eyes flicked to the door. I asked him why he brought gasoline into my garage. That's when his composure finally cracked. "Because you weren't cooperating," he snapped quietly. "Because everything was stalling. Because I needed leverage." Leverage. The word landed heavy between us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I simply slid my phone closer to him. "Say that again." He realized too late. He tried to recover. "You're twisting this." I tapped the screen. Audio waveform moving. Red dot blinking. Recording. Across the cafe, 2 uniformed officers stood up from a table I hadn't noticed before. Jason followed my gaze. His face drained of color. "That's when I told him," I said calmly, "that I never lost clarity. That every call you made from my phone synced to my work cloud. That every document you opened left a timestamp. That the hospital reversed your authority 3 days ago." He stood abruptly. The chair scraped loud enough for people to turn. "I was helping her," he said too loudly, looking around. "She's confused." One of the officers stepped forward. "Jason Miller." Jason backed up. I stayed seated. The detective approached from behind him. "Sir, we're placing you under arrest for attempted arson, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, insurance fraud, and falsification of medical declarations." People started filming. Phones lifted. Whispers rippled through the room. Jason turned toward me, panic finally visible. "Ari, please. Tell them." I didn't move. The detective read him his rights. Jason tried to speak over him. He tried to explain. He tried to laugh it off. Then the officer reached for his wrists. That's when Jason broke. "You were supposed to be unconscious," he said, loud enough for half the cafe to hear. "This wasn't how it was supposed to go." Silence fell hard. Every camera in the room caught it. The confession wasn't dramatic. It was careless, and it was permanent. They cuffed him in front of everyone. As they let him pass my table, he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as infrastructure, not as backup, as consequence. Outside, news vans were already pulling up. Inside, people stared. And Jason, who had spent weeks quietly replacing me on paper, was now being escorted out in handcuffs while strangers uploaded his downfall in real time. But it still wasn't over. because the most devastating part of his collapse hadn't happened yet. That was waiting in the systems he thought he controlled, and it was about to hit him all at once. By the time Jason reached the holding cell, everything unraveled. His bail from the arson charge triggered an automatic review of his financial activity. The bank's fraud unit, already briefed, froze every account tied to his name within minutes. His credit cards declined while he was still being processed. The insurance company flagged his claim as high risk due to recorded intent and third-party interference. The payout he'd been accelerating vanished into indefinite investigation. The realtor pulled the listing. His attorney withdrew. The hospital submitted a formal report documenting coercion, misrepresentation, and unauthorized medical influence. That single document invalidated every form he'd pushed through while I was sedated. And the recording from the cafe, his own words about leverage and unconsciousness, circulated faster than any legal memo. Someone posted it online. By evening, it had reached thousands. By night, his employer saw it. By morning, he didn't have one. Jason lost his freedom first, then his money, then his reputation, and finally his future. I didn't attend his arraignment. I didn't send messages. I signed one last document, this time voluntarily, cutting him out of every legal pathway connected to me. No contact, no authority, no access. He tried calling from jail. I declined. He left a voicemail saying he'd made mistakes, that he never meant for things to go that far. He still couldn't say my name without sounding entitled to it. I deleted the message. Because the ending wasn't emotional. It was administrative, and that's what made it irreversible. He had built his entire plan on the assumption that I would stay quiet, that I would be passive, that systems belonged to whoever spoke loudest. He was wrong. Systems belonged to whoever documents. And I had documented everything. When the detective finally closed my case file, he said something simple. You stayed calm. That saved you. He didn't know the half of it. Jason had tried to erase me with paperwork. He had tried to rewrite my life through signatures and whispered phone calls. Instead, he handed me his confession in pieces, and I assembled it, not with screaming, not with revenge, with timing, with silence, with proof. I didn't forgive him. I didn't need closure. I removed him. And the woman who walked away from that courthouse wasn't someone's younger sister anymore. She was the person who ended his story in front of witnesses. And Jason finally understood. I was never dying in the snow. I was waking up,